Hello everyone, this is Simply Put Finances, a series where we discuss money and how to use it in our homes. I'm Spark, your host, and welcome to my blanket fort. Let's get started. Today I want to discuss a very important principle called Pay Yourself First, sometimes called PYF. We're going to abbreviate it as PYF, and you're actually going to hear me use it as a verb today. Make sure that you are PYFing. So let's talk about it. First thing you need to understand is that PYF is the first principle of money management. It's the first principle. Everything that you build your finances on from here on after functions off of this PYF principle. Pay yourself first. Let me explain what I mean by that. Think about what you do every day as your work, as a job, right? As a professional, as an adult, you go to work all day for what? Well, most of us do it for money. It's kind of the difference between do you work to live or do you live to work? I suspect most of us are work to live type people, where we go to work so that we can have food and do the other things that we enjoy. So you work for money. So you use that money to subsist, to survive. Food, rent, clothes, shoes, car, payments, utilities, etc. You subsist off of that money so that you can survive. The subsistence is for you so that you can function and continue to live, and living is to continue to work all day. And you work all day so you can make money, you make money so you can subsist, you subsist so that you can continue to work all day. You know what this sounds like? This actually sounds like slavery. Hear me out. Think about what slavery is. You work all day to support other people. Isn't that basically what I've just described here? You work all day so that you can take that money and give it to everyone else. Your landlord, the bank, the car dealership, the utility companies, your child's school lunch fees. And at the end of the month, what do you have to show for it? If you are at the end of the month and you have nothing gained, no progress, if you have nothing to show for it, you're basically a slave. It's a pretty harsh stance, but I'm not the only one who's made that connection. And in one of my other video series, I go through the book, The Richest Man in Babylon. And in that text, he claims the very same thing. I'm assuming none of us want to work all day to support other people, and at the end of the month, we have nothing to show for it, for ourselves. So how do we break that? That's where PYF comes in. So what is PYF? It is the act of paying yourself before you pay anyone else. How much? Minimum 10%. Minimum 10% every paycheck. Every paycheck, no exceptions, before you pay any other bills. Now this is where it can get kind of tricky for people, because people might think, well, I have to pay my rent, and I have to buy groceries, and I have to pay this, and I have to do that, and she's got to go to lessons, and those things come first. That's probably the lifestyle that you've been living, and that's the lifestyle that the vast majority of Americans live, and that's why the vast majority of Americans don't even have $1,000 of cash in their pocket. We'll come back to that in a second. What is the PYF rule? 10% to yourself every paycheck, no exceptions. Let's look at this a little more in depth. So what does PYF actually look like? The average American household income is about $61,000. Now that's gross. Now if you don't know what gross means, gross income is money before taxes and other deductions. Okay? So when we see this statistical data, by the way, all this data I pulled off the internet and have references down in the descriptions below. On average though, $61,000 grossing per year before taxes. Well, we can't skip taxes. It's a sizable part of our income. So we can estimate that taxes are going to take about $11,000 out of that. I have a resource in the link down below for where I got that figure. So we can assume that if you're grossing 61 grand, you're actually going to be netting, bringing home 50 grand, roughly, right? Simply put. So if we're netting 50 grand a year, then that means that per month we should be getting about 41.66. Okay, so this is the average American household. You might be above this, in which case good for you. You might be below this, in which case you're just like me. Wherever you are in the spectrum, this is the example I'm using. So if we're making $41.66 a month net income, then our PYF, our paying ourselves first of a minimum of 10%, should be $416 and change per month. And what do you do with this money? Okay, we got the paycheck. It's here, we cashed it, or most likely direct deposited into your bank. What do you do with it now? You take out that $416 and change, or whatever your 10% is. And by the way, of course, you can go more than 10% if you want to. You take out that and you stick it in your piggy bank. You stick it in your savings account. You have a separate account somewhere for this money. This is not in your checking account. That's the money, that's the account that you spend to pay your bills and do everything else. Don't keep it in there. You're going to spend it accidentally. Put it in its own account. Take it out and put it in a glass jar if you want to. I wouldn't recommend it, but that's an option. It's probably better than being in your checking account, honestly, just for the sake of not accidentally spending it. So, $416 a month. Now you might be thinking, I can't afford that. There's no way. I can't afford 10% of my income, right? Whether it's $416 or $216 or wherever you are on the income spectrum, you might be thinking, I cannot afford that amount. I'll bet you can. So for PYF is $416, right? Now let's do a little bit of math. You shouldn't be spending more than 30% of your income on rent. That's the rule that a lot of experts recommend. Somewhere between, some people say 33% is the max. Obviously the lower the better. Dave Ramsey recommends no more than 25% of your income. So we're just going to round it to 30%, right? So if our income is the $41.66 per month, then that means you shouldn't be spending more than $1,250 a month on rent or your mortgage. If you're spending more than that 30% mark, you're living outside of your means by most professionals' advice. So following the 30% rule, there's $1,250. The average American spends anywhere between 9 and 12% on food. Of course, it's going to depend on how many mouths to feed, right? You have to consider that. But if you're considering these averages, then the PYF, the rent, and the food, that's $21.66 a month. That leaves us roughly $2,000 to pay for everything else. That's $2,000 to pay for utilities and internet and clothing and your kids' soccer lessons and whatever else. So you might still be thinking, nah, that's not enough. I can't do that, Spark, you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, test it. Let's test it. Spend a month, this month, whatever month it is right now when you're watching this. Start tracking your expenses. All of them, every single one. This is an assignment that I give to my classes. Get a piece of paper or an app or whatever and track every single expense that you make in a month. Whether it's the 50-cent soda refill or the $990 rent or whatever it is, track it. Every single expense throughout the month. And then when the month is over, note, like you've got your paper, your app, and highlight every single expense that was discretionary. Meaning every single expense that didn't have to happen. Going to the movies, buying that pair of shoes, getting that soda, eating out at McDonald's, whatever. Highlight every single expense that you could have done without. And I will bet you, if I was a betting man, I will bet you that the amount, if you total the amount of your discretionary spending, it will exceed the PYF amount. Total how much money you waste on things that you could have gone without. And I'll bet that total is more than the PYF amount. I'll bet you anything. For the majority of you, that's going to be true. You have extra money, most likely. And this is again where I have to remind you that more than 58%, or roughly 58% of Americans have less than $1,000 of cash saved anywhere. Less than $1,000. More than half of America, 350 million plus people, more than half of them that don't even have $1,000 of cash. And their source for that information is also in the notes down below. So don't be like that. Don't be like them. And a lot of you probably watching this, you might already be that way. No judgment. We can do better, and PYF is your step to get there. So let me show you what this can do for you, what PYF can do for you here. Average American income again, if you were to set aside the $416 a month, after 1 year, you'd have $5,000. That's just, remember that statistic I was just talking about? How more than 50% of Americans don't even have $1,000 of cash savings ready to go? You'd have that beat in less than 3 months. You'd be in the minority of Americans in less than 3 months using the PYF system here, assuming that was your income. This isn't hard. What I'm telling you to do right now, it's not hard. And if you're watching this right now and you're going, Spark, I can't do 10%. Well, then do 5. Do something, but I'll bet you can do 10. If you do that test of the discretionary spending, I'll bet you can do 10%. So you save up, right? And in less than 3 months, you have the majority of other Americans beat as far as savings goes. And then after 5 years of this PYFing, you have $25,000. After 10 years, you have $50,000. And if you make half of this amount of money, then just half these numbers. But the point here is that by paying yourself before you pay everybody else, you are building wealth. You're increasing your net value. You're not living paycheck to paycheck. And when you have $1, $2, $5, $10,000 in your savings account, you don't have to be afraid of the minor disasters. The blown tire, the dropped transmission, the refrigerator going out, the furnace blowing up. Hopefully not literally blowing up. You don't have to be concerned about those because you have $10,000. You can use that money in an emergency, and that's why we call that savings an emergency fund. This is not a we're going to go to the beach and party for a week fund. You can start up a different fund for that, a different savings account. This is an emergency savings fund. And with that emergency savings fund, you can be prepared for just about any rainy day. And a lot of experts will recommend that you have at least 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses in that savings account. So in this case, if we're making $4,100 a month, you should have a minimum of $12,000 to $13,000 in that savings account. And using this math at 10%, that'll take you 2.5 years to save up for that. 2.5 years, that's nothing. We're going to be alive for 80 years, most of us. And with 3 to 6 months worth of savings, you don't have to worry about those minor disasters. PYF, 10% every paycheck, no exceptions, before you pay anything else. Simply put, good luck.